All right, welcome everyone. If we haven't met yet, my name is Wendy Lawson, and I am the Associate Director working with the Management of Technology MBA and the Executive MBA students here at the Beedie School of Business. Welcome to this evening's panel on getting on board a board. With us this evening are some fantastic panelists that are going to be sharing their experiences with both being on a board and looking to hire board members. So you're going to get some interesting perspectives. The way we're going to work this is for the first hour, the panelists will be answering some questions that I ask of them. And then we will have time for a little bit of a group question and answer towards the end of that hour. Following that, a few of the panelists are able to stay with us for another half hour, which is great. And that at that time, we'll go into breakout rooms to have a little bit more in-depth conversation with you, and you can choose whichever person or people you would like to speak with. We have had a slight change in our lineup today. Unfortunately, John Jennings was not able to join us, but we're very fortunate that Cameron Wilson is able to join us from Watson, as well as Skip Triplet, who is sits on many boards. So I'm going to actually let them introduce themselves. So Cameron, we'll start with you today.
Sounds good. Thanks, Wendy. Hello, everyone. So as Wendy mentioned, I am not John Jennings, as was advertised. John does apologize, though, and send his regrets for not being able to be with us tonight. However, we're going to be carrying on without him. As Wendy said, my name is Cameron Wilson. I'm an executive search consultant with Watson Advisors and work with John. Watson is a governance and talent advisory firm based here in Vancouver. I, of course, fall into that talent strategies and recruitment side of the firm and specialize in board director and executive recruitment. From a personal perspective, I've sat on a few association boards and currently serve on the board of the Vancouver International Children's Festival, as well as a designated committee for Dress for Success Vancouver. So looking forward to getting the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cameron. All right, how about Rachel?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Barker. By day, I'm a senior manager for provincial e-health projects at the Provincial Health Services Authority and an MOT student, rapidly working my way through that program. And the reason I'm here today is I'm also the incoming president and chair of the British Columbia chapter of the Healthcare Information and Management Systems Society. And I've served several different roles on that board over the past couple of years, as well as serving on another board prior to that, and another sort of pseudo board in healthcare. So very happy to be here.
Thank you, Rachel. All right, Skip.
Hello, I am Skip Triplett, EMBA 1981. That's how old I am. President Emeritus at Kwantlen Polytechnic University and chair of the board of LaSalle College, Vancouver, which is a private creative industry college. Veteran of endless boards, let's just say from as large as TransLink to as small as the White Rock Hospice Society.
Lovely. Thank you and welcome. And Bernadette.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Wendy, for having me. My name is Bernadette De Silva, and I began my career in the brokerage business working in the corporate finance sector, where I helped companies go public, help them with raising capital through equity financings. And then I moved into the advisory business, advising publicly listed companies with their continuous disclosure obligations and regulatory compliance. I served as the corporate secretary for several of those companies, facilitating numerous board and committee meetings, as well as serving as a liaison between the board of directors and the C-suite. I was also invited to serve on some of the boards of the companies we assisted. And I believe this dual boardroom perspective has given me greater understanding of the best practices in corporate governance and the pros and cons of serving on a board. I currently sit on the BC Securities Corporate Finance Stakeholders Forum, which is basically made up of a broad range of capital market participants. The Commission uses this committee as a sounding board to review and comment on proposed capital market policy amendments and new policies before they are published. And I have recently graduated from SFU's Executive MBA program.
Absolutely. Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you. So before we get started, I have a question for the audience members. So if you would, you just type in the chat, what are some of the reasons you're interested in being on board a board? So just go ahead and type in the chat. What are just any of the reasons that you're thinking that this is why I might want to be on board a board? All right. To share your expertise. Great. Anyone else? Get involved in other businesses, Modi. Yeah, absolutely. Be part of something different from the organization you work for. Absolutely. Service, opportunity to grow in a different industry. Okay, great. All right, so we can see some different threads in there. Expand your connections. Oh, new challenges like that. Move outside of your comfort zone, contribute to the community, and connect with different people. Wonderful. Okay, so we've got a number of different things. All right, well, thank you for that. And so what I thought I'd start with is because one of the things that can be a little confusing is there's a lot of different kinds of boards out there. And, you hear about different ones. You hear about public boards, you hear about advisory, nonprofit, sometimes known as social profit. You hear about private, you hear about public. It's like, So I'd like to turn to Bernadette to answer the question for us a little bit more about, can you tell us about the categories of boards and how they differ?
So I'd like to start with the similarities. The overarching roles and responsibilities of the board of directors, such as the duty of care and the duty of loyalty in exercising their fiduciary responsibilities, are similar across all categories. Where they differ is in their organizational structure, which determines their accountability. So to just give you a brief description of the different kinds of boards, an advisory board consists of a group of experts who an entity uses as a sounding board to fill in gaps in expertise. They can be short-term or long-term. For example, if a company is going public, they would like an advisory board, someone who has capital market experience or entrepreneurial expertise. These individuals are highly sought after experts and are only willing to serve, to advise the company on an as-needed basis. The advisory board is a volunteer position that could be compensated through stock options. Social profit organizations are not-for-profits with a twist. They are revenue-generating social enterprises, and they are operated with two primary objectives: to achieve certain social, cultural, and economic outcomes, as well as to turn a profit to support their causes. And nonprofits are not really owned by anyone, but are formed to fulfill a mission. Nonprofit boards' main role is to oversee and guide the organization's decision-making to ensure that it is aligned with its mission, values, and vision by adopting sound ethical governance and financial management policies. Then for-profit entities can be bifurcated into private and public companies. The ownership of private companies are typically held by family businesses or partnerships. Having the CEO as the major shareholder makes it virtually impossible for the board to veto decisions, and very often the board of directors' role is by default just an advisory capacity. Public companies, on the other hand, are owned by shareholders of the company, and the directors have a fiduciary duty to oversee the strategic goals of the company, to guide the executive management in achieving these objectives, and to report to the shareholders on their stewardship. The main difference between private and public companies is that public companies face increased scrutiny and regulations compared to private companies. The intense scrutiny and the level of disclosure and regulatory compliance that public companies face is what really deters a lot of people into joining boards of public companies. And I think that just gives you a snapshot of what the different entities are. And basically, they are governed by their organization structure.
Great. Thank you so much, Bernadette. Anything to add from the panelists?
Just quickly, I would like to underscore what Bernadette went through in terms of the different distinctions and outlining those types of boards. It's very important whether you're applying for a position or being asked to apply, or you get a call from someone like me, to be clear on what this body does, what are their responsibilities, and what would your individual responsibilities be as a member of the board, as a member of an advisory board, for example, because it does make a huge difference in terms of your day-to-day decision making in terms of the role, and also how you position your candidacy to move forward in that selection process, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Good point.
I'll add a little bit to
Sure.
that. Another way to look at the kinds of boards that are out there is the level of involvement of the board. So with a large company or organization, the board's role is largely strategic and oversight. With a very small board, particularly a not-for-profit, the board may also have a management role. For example, on that small hospice society I mentioned, the only professionals on the board, in the organization, were board members. The other professionals were counselors. So you might want to take a look at where on a continuum from completely oversight and strategic to also operational, this particular organization you're interested in sits, and how you could cope with that.
Okay, thanks, Skip. And Rachel, you started to add something?
Yeah, I was going to make the same point as Skip, where you have working boards and you have boards that are largely strategic boards. And oftentimes we'll have people approach us who are clearly looking for more of a strategic role. And we're like, if you're comms, you're managing volunteers and you're writing communications and you're in Canva building things. And we need you to be able to do that and to steer volunteers to do that. So just that's sort of one of the first things to look at, I think, when you're looking for a role. What's the time commitment? What are the duties associated with this? How hands-on are you going to be here?
All right, absolutely, thanks. And Rachel, speaking of those different pieces, like when you think about it, what various types of boards look for in potential board members, and what, if anything, are the trends that you see these days?
Yeah, so I can speak to sort of where I'm involved, which is I'm going to say like industry associations, not-for-profits that tend to be sort of global with many chapters that are regionalized. And often, I mean, they're looking for experience in your industry, but sometimes not as much as you might think. They might be looking for specific skill sets. So for example, if it is a working board, you need people who can really function as treasurer and do the numbers. You need people who can do communications. You need people who have event planning skills. And that's really important, maybe even if you don't have as much industry experience, but you have that skill set. And the other thing that's really important, I'm going to say, at least for us, is that you have some knowledge and some involvement of what that association or board is doing beforehand. So we have a lot of people that pop up and say, oh, I'm really interested in HIMSS. I want to be on the board. Tell me more about it. And they're not members. They've never been to an event. They have no idea what we do. And sometimes we'll talk to them. I had someone have coffee with me a while back and I was like, well, you need to be a member for a year to qualify to run for a board seat. So you're not a member now, so we can get you signed up, and then maybe next year. And in the meantime, we can get you volunteering, we can get you involved, you can get an idea of sort of what you're getting into. And they were like, oh, and I never heard from them again. So show interest, be involved. It's sort of a bit of a dating match, like multiple people who we elected this year to our board were volunteers the previous year. It was great for them to know sort of what was coming in, for us to figure out what their skill sets were, and that it was a great match. And it really did give them a leg up on the other candidates.
A good point. Cameron.
Absolutely great point, especially for kind of more non-for-profit boards, social profit boards, and industry associations. That work and kind of foundation going into a potential application is just, it really speaks volumes to your level of commitment to the organization. And that would, of course, speak to your level of commitment going forward with a potential board appointment. It really is a good story to tell in terms of your progression with the organization. And frankly, once you get past a certain point in, say, the screening process, the application process, Some board directors or screening panels want to hear more about your motivation. Why are you passionate about this particular organization, this cause, this community of stakeholders? The skill set is one thing, but why are you going to be a motivated and contributing member to this board? And that's a key question to ask yourself before you even start writing an application or kind of buffing up your resume.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and to add to that, I just wanted to say in today, a lot of boards are looking for experience in corporate governance, ESG experience, sustainability experience. So if you have those experiences, I think you could also be to get on a public company board. I have most of my experiences with public companies, and I find that people with global experience and with finance and capital markets background, they have more of a chance of getting on a public company board.
Okay, so the global experience you mentioned as well.
Yes, especially in today's day, I think global experience is a very handy skill.
Okay. Great. Okay, thank you. All right. So one of the things, it sounds like you guys have touched on this a little bit, but let's maybe go into a slightly deeper dive of what kind of board might be right for you and your skills. In other words, like how does someone determine what's the way to go? What's the right board for them? You know, how to target. So for example, Rachel, you've mentioned this specifically for a nonprofit is get involved with the organization ahead of time, you know, volunteer, learn, and you know, what you mentioned, Cameron, about the motivation. So what are some of the other things that, you know, when you look at that, you know, what kind of board might be right for you and your skills?
Certainly, you want a core base of competencies. There are kind of a holy trinity of sorts around board competencies, around legal, financial, kind of broad business acumen, what have you. But when you're looking at your skill sets a little bit more holistically, I would encourage everyone here to really think about the perspective that they bring. Bernadette was speaking about capital markets experience and global business experience, and that all kind of goes into the pot in terms of your collective candidacy and what you have to offer to a particular organization. And it can be tough to kind of decipher what to extract and what to highlight out of that. And I guarantee you all that you have more to offer than might initially come to mind. Would really encourage everyone to think and reflect on what the company or the organization is all about. Who are their clients? Who are they serving? What challenges they might be facing both now and in the future? And where have you had similar experiences? Where have you had similar exposures? And really try to create and craft a bit of a narrative around your skills, your experiences, and how it can contribute in terms of a candidacy, and how it can contribute to the broader skill sets of the collective board. And we'll get into due diligence a little bit later, but I would like to touch on research right now. Really dig into prospective companies or prospective associations. Who else is on the board? Who has been on the board? And how you might fit in, how you might complement existing perspectives. That's really important to figure out from the outset, because again, it will really affect how compelling and how kind of attractive your potential candidacy is, as well as the prior involvement, especially for social profits, as was said before. The last piece that I would really kind of push to everyone's attention is just the financial literacy piece. That is probably the biggest thing that everyone can kind of tackle today. You don't need to be a CPA, but you know, can you read a financial statement, for example? Can you read a balance sheet? It's these core fundamentals that really build and develop governance muscles on the part of any competent and experienced director. And that usually starts at a social profit or non-for-profit board. And I'll be honest, there is a bit of a natural pecking order to these things, but it all helps to develop size and scale and sophistication in terms of those governance muscles that I spoke to before.
Great. Skip, anything to add?
Yeah, so I think some of the other skills, I absolutely agree with everything that has been said, particularly around finance and knowing your way around financial statements. But some other skills that most boards are looking for are collegiality, a willingness to try and understand before you seek to be understood. To quote Stephen Covey, the ability to withhold your judgment until you have heard. And connected with that, you need to be able to ask really good questions as a result of listening to what has been said. With respect to what kind of board is best for you, passion is an overworked used word, so I won't use it, but it should be an organization or an industry or a customer or client base that you're kind of fascinated with. Should be something you're really interested in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, it's when we think about, when we talk about people and, looking for work, etc. I mean, that's one of the things we talk about is, finding something that you're interested in, that you're going to want to get up to work. All right, Greg, we're going to be coming to that question shortly. Greg's asking about the ICD designation. We'll be coming to that shortly. I know that one thing when I was speaking with John, one of the things he said, what kind of board might write for you and your skills, and he said, noting what are the duties, and that it's not always about giving back. It's more about, for example, he mentioned that Watson had recently recruited for for the SPCA, and he said more so than giving back is what is it you have to offer a $60 million organization. Okay, so it's not just about giving back. It's like what do you bring to the table? So there we go. All right. So some of the things we do need to talk about is what kind of due diligence you need to do before accepting a board position. So Bernadette, do you mind starting us off on that?
Yeah, I think that's really important before you accept a position is to do your own due diligence and find out what is the culture of the entity, what is their reputation, interview other board members and find out how the board is run, what is the expectation. I think that's really important to sit down with other board members. Are they transparent about their disclosure? One way to do your due diligence is go to CEDAR and look at their public disclosure documents for the last 2 years. Some of the documents that will give you a lot of information is the annual information form, the management information circular. Read out about their news releases for the past few years. And ask your network, have they heard about this company? Have they heard about the executives? What is their opinion about the directors and the executives? And finally, when you have done all your due diligence and if you feel this company is right for you to sit on the board, ask about the D&O policy, which is really important again, to make sure that you are adequately covered.
What was that again, sir? The what policy?
The directors and officers policy. So the D&O insurance policy to make sure that you are adequately covered. I think and when you find out about the company, also make sure that this company, when you join startups, one thing to be aware of is if the company goes bankrupt, you have to disclose that information for 10 years on all your public disclosure documents, like your personal information forms and the management information circular, where they talk about directors that are going to be elected. So keep that in mind that for 10 years, you're going to have to disclose that information that you were on a board that went bankrupt. The other thing is look at their financial information, look how good they are with their disclosure, as I mentioned earlier, because again, if you don't file your financials on time, and you can, after 30 days, you are subjected to a management cease trade order that directors and officers are not allowed to trade. And if you still haven't filed your financials on time, you get a cease trade order. Now, again, these things have to be public disclosure or have to be publicly disclosed for 10 years. So just something I wanted to bring to everyone's attention, to do your due diligence really carefully before accepting a position on a board.
Yeah, really good point, Bernadette. I think that's the thing that people don't always look at is what could be the downside to getting on board a board. And so I think that's important. Anything else to add?
Maybe just to add, a director's insurance wasn't specifically said, but certainly ask those kind of questions. Ask what the board has in terms of its level of preparedness to not protect directors, but to ensure that good governance and compliance is a regular occurrence within the company. As Bernadette said, there is so much more available than one might think about any particular organization. So really do your research, figure out what kind of company, what frankly kind of people you might be getting involved with to ensure that it's the right fit for both parties. And to Skip's point, I really think asking other board directors around how the board culture is, how collegial is the board, and interview your own network informally rather around what people's perceptions of this potential company or organization might be, because it might surprise you, and not all board opportunities are necessarily a no-brainer.
Cool, thank you. All right. Rachel, can you speak to us? Oh, hang on. Do nonprofit boards typically offer insurance to board members as well? Rachel, do you want to take that one? And Skip?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Because you can be just as liable for financial problems with a not-for-profit as you can with for-profit. So to add to the due diligence bit, another thing you want to ask is the organization financially stable right now before you join it? And I think another due diligence thing is what is your tolerance for ambiguity, and that's part of the board culture. So, for example, a public university, KPU, SFU, you name it, the board thinks it's in charge, the faculty think they're in charge, the ministry thinks it's in charge, and I could go on. So, what is your tolerance for frustration, and how clear is the board's mandate? And who else needs to be taken into consideration?
Isn't that a point? And isn't that the truth about who all thinks they're in charge?
Right.
Oh, I love it. All right. So Rachel, would you be able to start us off on, the pros and cons of getting on board a board?
So,
And especially if you can speak to, you mentioned it was 1 point functional versus dysfunctional boards, and how do you tell the difference?
yeah, so I've been on both, and I'll say I've been on the board I'm on now is highly functional. They are phenomenal. I'm not just saying that because I'm chair. They were like that when I got here, and they have a huge amount of support from global. They had been around for like a 20-year history. They had a huge amount of support from past presidents, past officers. Everyone was still really engaged in that community. The global organization was very well run. That was not my first experience. So I was on a board for about a year before that, that I got pulled into because they had a particular skill set and I'd been volunteering. And they were in the same situation. And prior to that, I'm gonna say a pseudo board, which was a chapter. So not a board, same structure, group of people responsible for BC, but without the formality and the governance of the board, and they were new. And that was just how that global structure was running that. And it was somewhere that was large enough that they should have known better. They had like 60 chapters worldwide, massive organization. I would say I still got a lot of benefit out of all of them. Like even in the disorganized boards, in that first one, the pseudo board, I got to do phenomenal things. I got to travel and run events in different provinces. I got to run events for national industry conferences and lead the strategic planning and work with stakeholders sort of at the highest level of those sorts of health organizations. But it was a very stressful experience, and it was constantly no process for anything, things getting thrown over the fence. Global wanted it, so figure it out. And you're like, okay, well, can you give me more information on that? No, we can't. So I think one of those things is talk to the board before you get on it, right? Talk to an alumni of the board if you can find one. A lot of people, honestly, it's not a big corporate board. If it's just an organization like that, you just ping someone on LinkedIn and you're like, hey, I'd love to take you out for coffee and hear about your experience on this board. They will give you the good, the bad, and the ugly. And often people on the board, although people currently on the board might be a little more cautious about what they say, but you can ask them like how their experience was. Why did they stop being on that board? What caused them to leave? What's their vision for what the board should improve or go into going forward? And like you'll get some interesting nuggets from that about how organized the board is, how much structure there is, how much stability there is. Because if you have a lot of people turning over every single year, that is chaotic and it is not a good time. right, for you and for the people who stay behind, especially who have to rebuild. So oftentimes you'll see 2 and 3 year board terms, which are usually good in terms of knowledge retention and organizational history and having some stability to continue initiatives across on the board term transitions. But in any case, I would say I met really interesting people in all of those roles. It absolutely impacted my career. Like that first pseudo board I was on, I wound up transitioning, and to Mandy's point earlier, I did it because it was very different than what was happening in my own organization. My own organization was old and stodgy. This was interesting. It was innovation work. And I wound up getting employed by one of our sponsors who kept bothering me to come work at their startup. And then when I joined HIMSS, it eventually led to me getting the role that I'm in now, because we had multiple people in leadership on my team who were also on the board and had been on the board long term. But it also gives you really amazing insight into what's happening in your industry or your professional area. You meet people who do things that aren't the same things that you do, and you can learn from them. You develop really strong professional working relationships, and it won't be with every single person on the board. You're not going to be best friends with everyone, but I have some really long-term, strong relationships that have come out of all of this. I married someone on one of my previous boards. So, I mean, I think there's a huge amount of benefit, and it really depends on what you're looking to get out of it. If it's giving back, like absolutely, you can find a way to do that. If it's networking, absolutely, it's fantastic for networking. It can be fantastic for your career. I would highly recommend it as long as you're in a place where you're ready for it, you're ready to commit, and you can find something that's going to be stable. And especially as a first-time board member, find somewhere that's going to be a good experience for you. Like, you don't want to go in and have everything be chaos and nobody is consistent. There's no process.
Yeah, those are really, really good points, Rachel. Yeah, I was on a board of directors for the BCIT Alumni Association at one point, and you had people coming in and, fresh ideas and let's do this and let's do this. And then, the more seasoned board members are like, slow down just a little. Like, when you look at what we can realistically accomplish with so many hours a month, that's probably a little bit more than you can chew. But, one of those things that you don't always think about in the beginning. So, yeah. Cameron, did you have something to add there?
Yes, a few points. Rachel, really great kind of set of points there. I would absolutely agree with everything you said. In terms of commitment, I just want to underscore, please avoid being overboarded, being overcommitted with kind of extra board opportunities. The rule of thumb typically when you do have kind of a full-time job elsewhere is maybe 2, possibly 3, but that is an immense stretch. You really want to ensure that you're able to fully commit to these organizations in the manner that you've been asked to when initially being brought on. You really don't want to be doing any of these things kind of with one foot out the door. And frankly, from my perspective as a recruiter, you really want to get a sense from an individual the time they invested with a particular board, what they learned, what they were able to contribute, what they took away from, and what they achieved. And you really can't be doing any of that if you're moving between all these different commitments and frankly not really being present within an organization and taking the responsibility seriously. So that's just something that I do see from time to time, and I'll be honest, it's a point of concern, not necessarily a good impression.
Okay.
I would echo those, all of that, and it reminded me of a couple of things. One is you're not just joining a board. In most boards, how many committees will you have to serve on? And how many hours a month or a quarter or whatever you will have to spend, because people often forget that there are committees involved. Another good question to ask is, what is the length of a term, and how many terms can you serve? So you should be looking. A good board will typically have a fixed term, often 2 years or 3 years. Renewable 2 or maybe 3 times, and there's a maximum number of terms you can serve. All of those are good things, because if you don't have terms, particularly with a not-for-profit, you may find yourself joining for life. Well, I'm overstating that a little bit, but it can happen. And the other problem is, if there is not a maximum number of terms, you may have some people there that are past their best before date. So you've got to watch out for that as well.
What a great way to put it, Skip.
And sorry, Wendy, go ahead.
No, you.
And I wanted to add to that. I've served as a corporate secretary for a company that had no fixed terms. So members of the board of directors were there for 10, 15 years. They all had industry experience. So it wasn't a diverse board. And I have to say, as a corporate secretary, the meetings were really boring because they all had the same thought. There was no diversity of thought. So when you join boards, make sure there's a good mix of people who have experience as well as those with fresh ideas.
Really great comment. Thanks, Bernadette. So now the question about education. So what education and or experience do you need? So for example, one of the questions that was asked was about ICD experience. So can any of you answer that?
Well, I'll try. It really varies. For some boards, you will need a high level of experience and a high level of education. For others, you will, well, I won't say none, but there's no particular requirement. So for example, on some boards, the board may be looking for community representation, community experience. And so you're a high school graduate, but a active member of a community, and that's what they're looking for, somebody who can bring a community perspective to it. So the answer to that question is really all over the map.
Yeah, again, I've served on junior mining company boards, and they didn't seem to need ICD certification. So I think the most senior boards, that is definitely a benefit. And I hope I'm not stepping on toes here when I say that I think most women get ICD certified as opposed to men. I talked to a lot of people, a lot of men who sit on boards, and they didn't think the need for it. But I asked a few of the women, and most of them had done the certification. So there you go.
It's certainly a quality program, the ICD.D, and I've known a number of individuals who have taken it and have gotten a lot out of it. Probably the most consistent feedback is actually the cohort that they're with at the time, whether that opens the door to other professional opportunities, ironically other board opportunities, but they're able to learn from each other, and that's often a cohort across the country. All that being said, it is not a golden ticket to getting onto a board. It is really just a tool in your toolbox in terms of that education and experiential element that really adds to your overall candidacy. It certainly provides some reassurance, perhaps, for a selection committee or a screening panel, in that it gives you that credential. And it does give you that broad base of kind of academic experience and exposure as well. But some others have been equally successful by just building a solid foundation of governance experiences responsibly, one after the other. And typically that does start with non-for-profit or association boards.
Yeah, and Cameron,
I'm a good example of that. I do not have a certification. And when I retired from the presidency at KPU, it wasn't long before the phone started to ring, and it was all about governance consulting. And I asked the question, well, that's not in my background. But if you think about it, I'd served on, as I said earlier, all kinds of boards, from as large as TransLink to some very small ones. So I can take a look at an organization and pretty quickly figure out what kind of a board on a spectrum from strategic and oversight to working is going to be required. Now, having said all of that, another question to ask, a lot of organizations will either require you to get certified or they will, or they will pay for it. So that's another good question to ask. What about board education? What's the organization's commitment to educating its board?
Great, Skip. Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah. And I mean, I would say, so for the type of professional organization that I've been involved with, like, amazing if people have ICD certification, nobody does at this level. It's not necessary. But what you do need is you are going to want to have some basic competence in governance, or a board that is willing to bring you in and teach you those skills because you have something else to offer them. So something that I found really helpful is Vantage Point, which is a nonprofit for nonprofits. They'll do workshops and it's like under $200. Like, they're fairly affordable for half a day, like board roles and responsibilities, how to locate and engage skilled volunteers for your board, how to chair, like how to handle difficult meetings. And in theory, for example, like we brought someone on, we moved her into a volunteer management director role this year, and we're going to send her to the next Vantage Point workshop on engaging skilled knowledge volunteers and how to handle that. So, and then have her present back to the rest of the board. So there are things you can pick up along the way. And Cameron, I was wondering, so when I'm hearing the ICD, I'm hearing a lot of the same questions that come up sometimes when people are like, do I need my PMP as a project manager? Do I need my IIBA? Should I get certified? And often the answer feels along the lines of, well, if you're great and people are really excited about you, often that's enough to get you across the line. But if you don't, or it's between you and another candidate and you have the certification, that will sort of bump you up in the running. Is that kind of what you see from your experience?
So no, I would say again, that credential can provide a sense of reassurance on the part of whoever's making the ultimate selection. But ultimately, can you as a board candidate kind of talk the talk and around governance, around your experience and what the value add to your candidacy around your experience and perspective and what have you, what your value is to that board and what your experience is around governance. Again, you can earn that through various board appointments and what have you. Or you could go the education route or some kind of combination, to Skip's point, around board education, that once you're on a board, that's a very necessary topic to raise with your fellow directors. How are we ensuring that we're keeping our skills sharp? How are we ensuring that we're asking the right questions and are adequately prepared to be providing proper oversight? It really can't be gone without in most cases. And to Rachel, to your point around Vantage Point, that's another great provider. ICD.D is not necessarily the only game in town. There are a variety of lower cost options that still provide a great broad experiential basis that you can really build off of. But, and going back to the ICD.D question, that is really what it is. And it's an experience, it's an educational basis to build off of through practical experience.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and it turns out even SFU offers some education around this through the executive education. So there's a partnership with ICD for one part of it, and there's also a nonprofit education piece. So who knew, right? It's one of those things that yeah, I'm learning, and we will be pulling together some resources that we will be able to share with you. I, however, am going on holidays as of tomorrow, so you won't see anything until probably mid-August. All right.
I just wanted to add that Governance Professionals of Canada, they run courses for directors and corporate secretaries on how to run a board, what's expected of from the board of directors. And I've attended some of their courses, and I'm actually a member of the GPC, and they have some really good courses run by very, very experienced directors.
Excellent, wonderful. Yeah, so if any of you panelists have some of these thoughts and ideas, and I know you mentioned CEDAR earlier, Bernadette, could you explain what that is?
So CEDAR is the where public companies file all their disclosure documents. and I'm trying to remember what the acronym stands for. It escapes me right now, but I can put the link in the chat, and that's where you go and you find out the public disclosure for all publicly listed companies.
Wonderful.
And another thing I wanted to mention is that even the exchanges, the Toronto Stock Exchange, TSX Venture Exchange, also holds a lot of these director education programs and webinars. So that's something you can look into as well if you're looking to get on a board.
Great, thank you. All right. One thing I've noticed that we've heard the term social profit. So that was new to me when it was first brought up. So what does that really mean? So Bernadette, you covered it a little bit, but can you just quickly reiterate that?
I believe the only difference is they can actually turn a profit to support their causes. So they basically run like a not-for-profit, but they can, like it's a revenue generating organization. I don't have too much experience with it, but that's what I understand.
Yeah, it seems like rather than because when you think about it, really a not-for-profit, they're not to make profit, but at the same time, when they put it back in, it works out. So it just seems this is a newer terminology, calling things social profit. So it's interesting to hear. Right.
And it's a legal conundrum for some not-for-profits because you are not allowed to earn a profit, or you lose your not-for-profit status, or worse, if you're a charity, you lose your charitable status. So the government of British Columbia, in maybe 15 years ago, created a new class of company, and I forget what it was called, something about social good. I don't know if anybody's actually registered a company under it, but it allows you to make a profit that goes back into the social good that the organization exists to serve.
There we go. Okay, thank you. All right, so getting on a board. So we've talked about different things about if a board opportunity appears, but what about if you're starting from scratch? So what helps you get on board a board? Okay, so Bernadette, do you want to start us off?
From my experience, I think it's networking. I can't stress the importance of networking, and I have to admit that all my previous board positions have resulted from networking. So for some of you who don't know what that is, just go to all your contacts, go to companies you've dealt with in the past, make yourself visible, let them know that you are looking to get on a board, and tell them about what's your expertise, what is it that you will bring to the table. Attend networking events, and at the networking events, if you find them overwhelming, try to meet up with people one-on-one. I've now tried, after I finished my MBA, I'm looking to get on more boards. And I've reached out to all the companies I've worked with previously, just asking people directors and executive management, if they would, can I grab a coffee with them? Not one person has said no. And I think all of us have this altruistic sort of behavior that we want to help others. And so reach out to people on your network, tell them about your interests, tell them about your skill set. And I can guarantee you that somebody will know somebody who is looking for a board position, and somehow they will connect you with a company. And a company that is looking for a diverse skill set. If you have, for example, corporate governance, and that's what they lack in expertise, then it's a great fit. And you happen to be at the right place at the right time. So reach out, network, and that's the best way to get on boards.
Great. All right. Anything to add?
I know we want to hear from Cameron too on this one, but one thing I'll say is the board I'm on now absolutely was through my network. It was when I was sort of recruited into, because they knew I had experience, they knew I had a good skill set that was a fit for what they needed. But one of the earlier boards, honestly, it was just me reaching out and saying, how can I get involved with this organization? How can I contribute? What can I do? And I did start out as a volunteer. And then eventually what happens is if there's a nominations committee, or if there's a discussion, if you either self-nominate or they're looking for candidates, like who comes up in our discussions is very engaged members and people who have been volunteering, and we'll go to them and say, we see that you're interested. We know what you can do. What's your interest and, availability to maybe consider a board role for the upcoming year? So it doesn't also, and again, maybe don't reach out and say, I want to be on the board, put me on the list, because you can do that and they'll look at you, but you're going to be a much stronger candidate if the discussion is, how can I get involved? How can I help? Get familiar with each other, get known to the people involved in that decision-making process, and then get on the board. But to Bernadette's point, networking. Yeah, absolutely that as well.
Great, thank you.
Maybe to add to that. Oh, sorry, Skip, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say to Bernadette's point about grabbing a coffee, advice I gave for years and years to students looking for a job was the company you're interested in, find out who the manager of the department you're interested in is, give them a call and say, I'm a student at so-and-so about to graduate this year. I'm really interested in your industry. But before I make any decisions, I'd like to know more about it. Can we grab a coffee so I can ask you some questions about your industry? And you would be surprised how often that results in a job offer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So very similar. Exactly. I'm hearing some themes here, folks. I know the students that I have worked with have heard the team networking. And to me, it's, often people say, well, I'm working my company and I don't think I want to do a change yet. And it's like, yeah, but networking is for your future, not just for your present. It's getting yourself known there. And for opportunities like these to show up, often it's the people who I've seen that do the network, that are curious, that want to learn more about other people and other organizations and other companies, and sometimes find something that they never thought they'd be interested in, but wow, was this ever a fit for me? So yeah, thanks, Skip. Okay. All right. So
Wendy, if I could just add on that quickly, just for the fourth time, networking is key. Would encourage everyone to really leverage that to the best of their ability. And Rachel made a great point earlier around going to those people who are already serving on boards, or perhaps have already served on a board that you're particularly interested in. Again, ask them out for coffee, ask about their experiences, and potentially ask them how you could even be a fit, while also being prepared to state that on your own. Frankly, open-ended questions in terms of those networking coffee interactions, people will always tell you more than they perhaps otherwise should. And it's always great just to kind of get that unfiltered feedback on someone's experience, what an organization is like, and perhaps how you should approach things going forward. So I cannot underscore that enough. And I might get lambasted by my recruitment colleagues for mentioning this. LinkedIn has gotten a lot better. If people really have no idea where to start, I would encourage you to jump on. You can plug in some quotation marks around board director, board member into the search field under jobs and see what pops up. Do not necessarily go with those options, but it gives you an idea of how people are marketing these opportunities. And that's where the due diligence piece comes in that we spoke to about. If something does interest you, really do your due diligence and do some extensive research to determine if this is an organization you want to get involved with, and then you can go from there. What we're seeing a lot of is, especially in the non-for-profit sector, executive directors who need to recruit their own board directors and really have nowhere to turn. So some of them are turning to posting to job boards like LinkedIn, but also through professional association email lists. I think Rachel made this point also earlier. Get involved with an organization. There are tons of kind of niche fields out there that you can demonstrate a particular passion towards, and you'd be surprised if you put yourself out there what other opportunities may come your way.
Great. All right. Thanks, Cameron.
Well, Cameron just triggered something in my mind. Associations. So if you're interested in a not-for-profit board, check with the Vancouver Foundation or the Victoria Foundation, and they will know who is looking for boards and who isn't. For profit organizations, Vancouver Board of Trade, Business Council of British Columbia, Surrey Board of Trade, wherever you are. Those are some organizations where they can often give you some tips about who may be in the market for board members and what they're looking for.
Great. Okay. Well, we're just coming up to the part where we're about to get into a little bit of Q&A. But before we go, I'd like to, or before we get into that part, I just want to share with everyone, I'm going to share with you a sample of a board resume that I will be sending out to the participants. This has been graciously shared with us by Watson, and we really appreciate that. And so it is a little different than a regular resume. So interesting right off the top is if you've had any board or chair expertise, they'd like to see it here right off the bat. A little bit about your functional expertise, your governance experience, your financial acumen. And I think this has been brought up a few times. So good things you guys have all taken the accounting and finance courses, as well as your industry experience. And then it goes specifically into any board experience and any executive experience. And then it goes on to your other work experience and so on, and your education. So just wanted to make sure to mention or to show you this, and we will be sharing that with the participants. And probably the best thing I'll do is get everything up onto Beedie community so you can see the recording as well. All right, so now I'd like to open up for just a little bit of Q&A from the audience, if there's anything specific you're wanting to ask the larger panel. And if not, then what we can do is we can put the panelists into breakout rooms and you can go speak to a specific panelist to inquire more. So first of all, any general questions? Yeah, Rachel?
I was going to ask Cameron a question, actually.
Sure.
So Cameron, if you, I think a lot of the people, let's say coming out of my program, the MOT, maybe will serve on a professional board, or association board, or not-for-profit. What is the path for those people to move with working like someone with Watson? Like, what do you look for when people come to Watson and say, I'm interested in a board role, or does Watson go out and find them?
Thank you for the question. Actually, that is a bit of a misconception about executive search, at least in the way Watson and some other retained search firms conduct their business. They are retained by a particular client for a specific mandate to recruit one board director, two board directors, maybe a CEO. So that is kind of an engagement fixed in time. With that, if you were to contact them, odds on that paying dividends would really depend largely on timing and your ability to stay engaged with the particular search firm or the particular recruiter. Obviously, we get a lot of unsolicited messages all the time with people expressing interest in roles, and we are more than happy to have a conversation with folks, get a sense for their experience, that value add that we spoke about before. And every single search firm has a centralized talent bank that I hope they would happily put anyone who's interested into, to really, because that's really the first place any of us go when we're trying to fill a position. It's our own networks, it's our firm's networks, it's the people and professionals we've met along the way in other engagements. Obviously, original research plays a big part in a successful search as well, but you have to start from somewhere, and usually it's in your own backyard with your own network. So if you are really looking to make that next step, I would encourage you to contact myself, contact my colleagues as well as Watson. I did include a link, actually. Through our Academy practice line, we do offer governance training with a particular course called Governing with Intention and Sharing with Intention as well. If that's of interest, happy to speak to that later. But in terms of kind of leveraging those particular board opportunities, look into executive search services. What opportunities are posted through those firms' websites and job boards, and try to get in touch with some recruiters to see if there's any opportunities that are available. You might not necessarily get a result tomorrow, but again, the more people that are aware that you're looking and of your background and again, your value add, the more likely it'll pay dividends in the future. So in other words, hustle.
There you go. All right, any other questions? All right, so Clayton, I think you're still there. Do you mind putting the panelists into breakout rooms for me, please? And then There we go. Okay, so if everybody knows, open room is Cameron. You can see Skip, you can see Bernadette, and you can see Rachel. So participants, please feel free to just jump in and talk to any of the panelists you like. If you've got a couple more questions, or just introduce yourself is never a bad thing either. And of course, if you have to go, have a great day.